All right, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to PNP Live. My name is Margaret Orto, and I'm the events coordinator in the Children and Teens Department at Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this virtual format where we continue to bring authors and new books to you. I have the pleasure of hosting our event this evening, and I'm delighted to welcome our guests, Hannah Testa, Xiye Bastida, and Deborah Taylor for a special Earth Day program. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. You can click the link we will drop in the chat to get your own copy of Hannah Testa's Taking on the Plastics Crisis. Please also consider a book donation purchase tonight to the School Without Walls at Francis Stevens here in Washington, D.C. School Without Walls focuses on environmental stewardship and has won first place in the Caring for Our Watershed competition for 3 consecutive years from 2017 to 2019. To make a book purchase donation, simply write book donation in the comments field in the checkout process. And if there's no need to, arrange for any shipping, just say book donation in the shipping field as well. Tonight, if you have a question for our panelists, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. You can also upvote the questions you like and want answered. We'll get to the audience Q&A after the presentation. Now onto the event you're waiting for. Hannah Testa is the author of Taking on the Plastic Crisis in the Pocket Change Collective, as I mentioned. She is a sustainability advocate, international speaker, and founder of Hannah for Change, an organization dedicated to fighting issues that harm the planet. She has partnered with politicians to successfully approve legislation to protect the Earth's oceans by limiting single-use plastics. She has received numerous honors and awards, including the Teen Earth Day Hero by CNN, the Young Superhero for Earth Award by Captain Planet, and the Action for Nature International Young Eco Hero Award, among many others. Additionally, her work has been featured in several books, magazines, and publications, and she has been a TEDx speaker. She is a board member, advisor, and youth ambassador for several organizations and a mentor to several young activists. Joining Hannah in conversation this evening is Xiye Bastida, an 18-year-old climate justice activist. She is an organizer with Fridays for Future and the co-founder of Re-Earth Initiative, an international youth-led organization that focuses on highlighting the intersectionality of the climate crisis. She was born in Mexico and was raised as part of the Otomi Toltec indigenous community. She is the recipient of the UN Spirit Award for the year 2018 and currently attends the University of Pennsylvania. Moderating tonight's conversation is Deborah Taylor, who recently retired from the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland. She has chaired and served on many American Library Association committees and on the National Book Awards jury for Young People's Literature. She was named the 2015 recipient of the Coretta Scott King Virginia Hamilton Award for Lifetime Achievement. She is a reviewer and an adjunct professor teaching young adult literature at the University of Maryland College of Information Studies. And now I'd like to turn the program over to Deb, Xiye, and Hannah. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I can't think of a better place to be on Earth Day than with these two just outstanding environmental activists. And I'm so impressed with all the things that you've done already in your lives, but I can't wait to hear, how did you spend Earth Day? Hannah, you want to start?
Of course, yeah. So happy Earth Day, everyone. So of course, every day is Earth Day, but on this special day, I started the day, I was on the Drew Barrymore show, talking a bit about my book and some of my activism. I did a cleanup with my friends and family in the neighborhood. And I also went to school because I still go to high school. So I did have class today. And then I did an Instagram live today with the creators account on Instagram. And now I'm joining you all here today.
What a busy day. Xiye, what did you do today on Earth Day?
Well, I had a similar schedule, and I'm sure all activists have had a similar schedule today. You know, instead of Earth Day being this relaxing day to connect that we wanted it to be, it's kind of, you know, a lot of work. So I started my day by waking up at 7 a.m. to join the Leaders Summit on Climate, the Biden Climate Summit this morning. I was the youth speaker invited to address all of the 40 leaders invited. And it was so surreal because I was on a Zoom call with literally 40 presidents. And, my speech is pretty harsh. I'm calling them out. I'm calling them naive. I'm calling them pessimistic. And I was a little scared of giving that speech, but those were the words that needed to be said. And so that's how my day started. Then I went on a live with UN Women. Then I tweeted something about the president of Mexico, and I've been on like 20 media interviews with Mexican media outlets. So my day has just been filled up with a lot of interviews about my message in Spanish, which I'm really happy to give. And now I'm here with all of you sharing space.
Well, that's a really busy Earth Day, but really glad that you're getting the message out today when so much attention is focused on it. I love the idea, Hannah, that every day is Earth Day. But I really do think when we have a chance to focus on the message, it helps us, I think, really recognize just what an important topic this is. So I'm really, really delighted that you got to do that. So many of us are concerned about what's going on in our environment. How do we turn our concern into action? And I'll start with you, Hannah, and then go over to Xiye.
I think one of the best ways to start is to educate yourself and kind of immerse yourself in all the information on the issues you care about. So whether it's plastic pollution or climate change, we have so many incredible resources and technology at our fingertips. So you can find resources online and learn from reputable organizations in the field and learn as much as you can about these issues. And then from there, you can help educate other people, whether that's your friends, families, people in your communities. And again, you can turn to these reputable organizations and find their campaigns and initiatives that they're currently working on and chip in and help participate in those, or you can even start some of your own. But it's so important that you do take that first step and turn that concern into action, because if we all sit here and worry and hope that somebody else is going to take action, nothing will be done. So it's so important that people step out of their comfort zone and do something about it.
Really, really important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said, Hannah. And something that I can add to that is that even though it requires stepping out of a comfort zone, it doesn't mean that you have to change who you are to be part of the solution, because the climate crisis touches every single sector, which means that every single sector is needed. And when thinking about it that way, anything that you kind of embody as your skill can be used to tackle the climate crisis, whether that be an artist or a writer or a photographer or an engineer. We really need all of these different perspectives to be part of the solution. So that's, the only thing that I can add.
You're so young to get started in this field. How did you get started? How did you get so engaged with this? Xiye, how did you get started at such a young age to be involved in such an important topic?
Well, I think that there's not one or two things that sprung activist into activism. Is really a culmination of a lot of knowledge, experience, but also just realization that we can't wait for other people to do something if we are seeing the problems ourselves. So I grew up in Mexico. I was born and raised in Mexico and grew up in my community, which is Otomi Toltec, which is an indigenous group in Mexico. So I grew up with this philosophy of reciprocity and care for Mother Earth. And that shaped how I saw the world. When I saw companies coming into my community and polluting it, when I saw, all of these transnational companies coming in and wanting to build a train line that cut right through all of our biodiversity, that is disconnect from what we're supposed to do with Mother Earth. And in 2015, my hometown suffered from flooding. So that's something that showed me that the climate crisis is already happening. It's not happening in 100 years. And I'm sure Hannah can say the same thing about plastic pollution. You see it everywhere. We ingest it. And that's really when I decided that I couldn't wait to grow up to be someone or to do something, that we can really change the world just when you have enough information and you make your voice heard.
And Hannah, how did you get involved?
Yeah, like Xiye said, there wasn't like a key moment where it's like, I'm going to be an activist. It was definitely a culmination of learning and kind of easing into the movement and trying to figure out where I best fit in this movement and what I can attribute. But I think I've always just been super passionate for our planet, and that some of my earliest memories are spending time outdoors with friends and family. And as I started growing older, and I say growing older, I was around like 10 years old, as I was growing up and learning all the issues going on in the world, learning about endangered animal species, learning about deforestation, climate change, plastic pollution, it broke my heart to know that humans were destroying the very planet we need to survive. And it was mainly fueled by human greed. And even as a 10-year-old, I was able to understand that this is our fault and we have to do something about it because it's going to impact our lives now, but also my generation and for generations to come. And I first went online, as I said. So I was finding organizations in the field and learning ways that I can participate. So I would chip in wherever I could, whatever projects were out there, I would try and support. And then eventually I wanted to start leading my own projects and initiatives. And that's what led me to starting Hannah for Change, so that I can lead my own projects. And that led me to where I am today.
How do you think adults can support young people like you who see these things, who grow up around it and who become passionate, but they may not even be of an age like you guys? You said you were 10 years old. What can adults do? Parents, teachers, community leaders, what can they do to encourage that kind of involvement, engagement, and activism? Hannah?
I would say, especially for young people and youth activists, we already have so many obstacles in front of us because of our age,
Right.
and adults already putting stereotypes or boundaries in front of us because we are, 10 years old or 18 years old. So if you are an adult and you see other young people in this movement or children in your classroom that are interested, or seeing any of your children that are inspired by these movements, don't silence them and help foster that passion that they have. And I'm so lucky to have such supportive parents and also to have role models in my life, like teachers that I've had along the way that have seen that passion in my eyes and was able to help foster that and help encourage me. Of course, there's been adults along the way that have discouraged me or didn't believe in the work that I do. And it's so much easier to help uplift people. Why would you spread hate anyways? But as an adult figure, and you see young people, try and support them because there already are so many roadblocks along the way.
Xiye?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just like Hannah, I also have really supportive parents who were actually activists themselves. They met in Quito, Ecuador, and before that in Rio de Janeiro in the first Earth Summit. So they truly have like an climate activism love story. And that meant that I grew up in an environment that was not only supportive of changing the world and being engaged, but also in an environment that in which kind of this community was fostered. And I think that's one of the most important things that adults can do: validate our dreams, validate our ambition, validate that we want to change the world, because we're not the ones setting the targets, science is. So I think that that's what adults should do, support us with access to places that we can speak at, where we can voice ourselves, support us with people power when we strike, support us with handling all of the logistics when it comes to getting permits for our demonstrations. There's so many things that we need help with, and the least that I feel like when I think of support, intergenerational support, I always think of what someone once told me: always hold the hand of someone older and always hold the hand of someone younger. And when we do that, we can truly walk forward together, because Hannah and I also both recognize that there's younger kids coming up, a younger generation that we also have to make sure are in touch with themselves and the earth.
Hannah, your book takes on one primary topic. It makes it almost easy to focus in a way. Was that an intentional choice when you really focus in on the plastics crisis?
Yeah, so when I was first writing this book, I was told about how much I could write, and knowing that it was a fairly short book, it's around 60 pages, as much as I can write about plastic pollution, because it is such a vast issue, I knew that I had to narrow it down to the main points of plastic pollution and a nice snapshot of what the issue is and why it's so important, but still also covering other topics like how it's connected to climate change, how recycling isn't the best solution, and still talk about solutions, ways that people could get involved, and still share some of my stories along the way, but also highlight other youth activists in this movement as well. Because again, it's not just me and Xiye in this movement, there are so many other youth activists that are leading the way, having incredible impact in their own communities and in the world. So I want to make sure I also highlight their stories and their successes as well.
Yeah, I was really, there was so much that I learned just in those short 60 pages about the role of plastics in our society. And, you could recognize some of the things that you see all around you. So it was really an important way to kind of focus on that particular topic. Xiye, it's interesting that you're called a climate justice activist. Describe climate justice for us. What does that mean to you?
Well, that's my favorite question, because when we talk about justice, we talk about intersectionality, and we talk about the fact that the climate crisis is not only about the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. It's not only about what international conferences call climate action. When we talk about climate justice, we recognize that all of the systems that perpetuate the climate crisis, such as pipelines, the mining industry, all of this infrastructure that pollutes and contaminates our communities, are located in primarily indigenous Black and Brown communities. And that when the climate crisis hits, it hits frontline communities who are the least empowered not empowered, but are the least able to build back better, are the least able to protect and restore their communities. And so that's why I call myself a climate justice activist, because there's no climate justice without social justice. We need to understand that the climate crisis exacerbates all current injustices, including racism, including gender inequality. And so when we think of solutions, we need to think holistically. So that's what I want leaders to do, to not only talk about how they're gonna invent or implement this new technology if it's not taking communities into consideration.
I don't mean to throw a curveball. This is a question that has just occurred to me. But we're mostly talking about our part of the world, so to speak. Are you all engaged with folks? I heard you talking about meeting with other activists on Zoom, talking to the UN. This is bigger than just what's going on in our country, because we're all so interconnected. Do you see other countries where they're making progress in areas that we can learn from? I'll start with you, Hannah.
There definitely is. And I think sometimes in America, we're falling behind and not doing enough. And especially just in Europe in general, a lot of countries in Europe and in the EU in generally have so many great initiatives, more sustainable initiatives, and better promises for renewable energy and diverting away from fossil fuels. So I think even looking to them as leaders and kind of as role models to see what's working, what isn't, and being able to implement that here in America. And I know with some of the policy work that I help work on here in the US, even looking to other pieces of legislation that has already been passed in other countries and kind of using that as a template, as a resource. Why reinvent the wheel when it's already working in other countries? That has been a great way to get involved here in America and help, bring up more solutions. So looking to other countries has been very helpful, but it also shows that in America, we are falling behind and there is so much more that we could be doing. And this is a space where we can be a leader in this movement and we're falling short.
Xiye?
Well, I think that this question is really complicated because even though there are countries who have great solutions, we need to recognize that a lot of the times these solutions are still rooted in greed capitalism. in the notion that we can make money and save the world at the same time. And I feel like a lot of leaders need to let go of that idea. We need to subsidize a lot of the industries that need our help. And even if they don't make you money right away, they still need to be implemented, because the alternative is our futures. The alternative is, the joy of future generations. And so I think that the solutions that must be implemented are not only the ones that are already working in other countries. Like, if you haven't watched the documentary 2040, I really recommend it. It shows what the world would look like in 2040 if all the current known solutions were implemented. So it's not only about that, but it's also about recognizing that indigenous philosophy is just so important when it comes to climate solutions. Because if we don't have a paradigm shift, if we see climate activism as a hobby or as a burden rather than a way of life, we're not going to get very far. So I think that it needs to be a shift of where we get our solutions, but also what mentality we have with the whole, the whole concept of what solutions are.
And I think the whole idea that everything cannot be monetized. There is such a thing as quality of life. There is such a thing as whether or not you have, good air to breathe, and whether or not you have parks to play in for children. So not everything, you're right, not everything can be turned into, oh, well, we're going to make this amount of money if we go to green energy, or so to speak. So I hear that, but I think that there are many people who feel they have to do that to sell ideas because of the environment we find ourselves. But I agree with you 100%. We need to look at it holistically and not just in terms of how it can be monetized. And I'm going to read this because I was struck by this quote in your book. Most people think that because they recycle, they're doing everything they can to fight plastic pollution. But it turns out that recycling isn't the perfect solution we've been led to believe. The system is broken. And no, I'm not suggesting that we stop recycling, because we shouldn't. It's just that recycling alone isn't really enough. Unfortunately, if we're not recycling properly, we may be causing more of a problem. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Of course. Recycling is probably one of my favorite topics in a sense, because that's something that we've all heard and all been led to believe. And that's something that mainly the producers and main polluters of plastic has marketed to us and taught us for so many years, that they're not the problem, we are, and that the way to get out of this problem is to recycle. That's the only solution. And unfortunately, recycling is not a great solution. Recycling is great for other materials like aluminum, glass, and paper, but unfortunately, when it comes to plastic, it's so much more complicated than melting it, turning it back into something brand new. We actually incinerate more plastic than we recycle plastic. And oftentimes we think that when we're putting plastics into our recycling bin, that it'll turn into something new. But unfortunately, most of the time, those plastic pieces are either being thrown away or they're being shipped to other countries. We have a big problem here in America, but also most westernized countries, of shipping out most of our recyclable trash to other countries, mainly in Asia, for them to deal with this problem. And so they're putting them in these communities to recycle, quote unquote, oftentimes there as landfills, creating slums for these communities. And I know I talked a little bit, or you mentioned earlier, about connecting with other youth activists. I met a friend and a youth activist who lives in Indonesia, and her own community was beautiful, and now it's being polluted with our trash. And there's piles and landfills in our own community. The river that they used to bathe in, rely on water, is now polluted with our garbage. And well, because we've been taught that recycling is the solution, but unfortunately our recycling systems are not up to date with the amount of plastic we're pumping in and the different kinds of plastic. It's not as easy as, paper is, where all paper is pretty much equal. There's all different kinds of plastic, all kinds of densities, colors. It makes it so much more harder. And a lot of them are contaminated with food or oil. So it makes it much more complicated than we've all really been led to believe for such a long time. So it's more than just recycling it. and kind of having this guiltless use of plastic, but trying to stop it at the source, whether that's in your own individual lives of trying to refuse plastics wherever possible and using more reusables, but also putting more pressure on the producers of these plastic products and having more effective policy change. I've helped, last year I spoke at the introduction for the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. That's the first national bill here in the US for plastic pollution. And what I love about the bill is it targets the producers of these plastics to be responsible for the waste management of it, instead of blaming the local communities that are trying to recycle all these plastic products. So making them responsible for the waste management and having, what are they called? Not refillable stations, but beverage container spots where you can bring back like cans, plastic water bottles and glass and get 10 cents back. And also phase out certain types of single-use plastics. But it also touches on like environmental racism. So kind of stopping certain types of manufacturing and mainly petrochemical sites and check the air quality there, making sure they're up to code before continuing. Because unfortunately, plastic pollution is a huge problem for people that live near incineration sites or petrochemical facilities.
Xiye, it sounds like Hannah's example shows where the climate justice or injustice and the plastics crisis kind of come together, that these things are not mutually exclusive. Can you speak to that a little bit?
100%. And I couldn't, have said it better than Hannah. We're both part of the Plastic Pollution Coalition as ambassadors. And, she just spoke to it perfectly, because it is true. Only 9% of plastic gets recycled. And, we think that, it's recycling is a great step. But it's actually a loophole that corporations have created so that they can keep producing and the blame falls on us.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens in other industries, the fashion industry, where most of our clothes are made from polyester and cotton, which cotton is great because it doesn't include polyester in it, but it takes a lot of water to make. We are in a culture of overconsumption and of fast fashion, where we want to always get the newest thing. And for most people, clothing doesn't even last more than 1.5 to 2 years. And, right now, I personally made a pledge to not buy any new clothes for a year. And I've gone on this journey for almost 3 years now, because I realized that I was kind of being dependent on the marketing, strategies that were telling me you need to have this new thing. And when I broke away from that, turns out I didn't need any of that to fill any of my needs as a teenager, which we think we do. And this happens in the food industry, where we throw away so much food that we make, when there's countries and communities who lack a lot of food security. And I could go on and on about all the industries where the production doesn't match the consumption, and it's also not properly regulated. And, that's why we need the intersectional solutions, recognizing that the climate crisis is not about only the carbon in the atmosphere, but all of these other sectors that we blindly rely on.
And, because we're all interconnected. I think if anything, if COVID has taught us anything, it's that it's not like you can stop something at the borders. These things are all interconnected. We have to fix it so that it works for everyone, because we're just connected. The world is too small not to think about it that way. Hannah, for you, what do you consider sustainability? How do you define sustainability?
That's such a great question. And I think I like to look at the root of the word sustain. Talk about sustainability. We want to sustain our natural resources, sustain the planet that provides us everything. This is our life support system, and being able to sustain that for this world, for the generation that's already here, and for generations to come. And right now, the production that we're at, the consumption that we're at, is not sustainable. We cannot sustain the natural resources now for future generations to come. And that's where we need to focus on more regenerative solutions, and focusing and definitely divesting away from fossil fuels, more into renewable energy. And that's where plastic pollution also comes into play, and how plastic pollution and climate change interconnect. 99% of plastics is made from fossil fuels. So the the big oil and fossil fuel industry is trying to divest from energy from fossil fuels, but more into plastics, as they're realizing that people know more about climate change, but plastic pollution, people don't really know much about fossil fuels and plastic pollution. So now I think by 2050, 20% of oil usage will be towards plastic alone. And so trying to cut that from the source as well and trying to divest away from fossil fuels in general will solve a lot of the world's issues that we are facing. Of course, it's not the perfect solution. Of course, there's so many other things we have to do on top of that. But our reliance on fossil fuels for energy, and on top of that with plastics that we're producing and pumping out at such a cheap cost, those are just a couple of things that we can do to really have a more sustainable world for here and hereafter.
And that is so important to think about in terms of how we go forward. I mean, and things, they're changing rapidly, more exponentially, rather than even doubling. They're just moving at such a rapid rate that we have to come up with solutions that work right now. Xiye, when you talked about what you did today, you talked about having to speak truth to power a little bit about, one of the activities that you did. And it seems that, at least in this country, and so much of this whole discussion has been caught up in our own political divisions. And how do we bridge that? How do we get from having people stake out their positions based on which side of the political divide they stand on?
Well, I think that up until now, that has been an issue that I was really surprised by, keeping in mind that I was not raised in the United States. So I actually had no idea that there were people who believed and did not believe in the climate crisis, but also that those represented two different political ideologies. Because I think the US is one of the only countries that has a clear divide between political sides and believing or not in the climate crisis. And, I think that for me, at least, I have tried to understand why people would not want to realize and believe about the effects that the climate crisis is having. And I came to the conclusion that our problem is not denialism, because there's actually a very small number of denialists in this country. One of our biggest problems is apathy. Apathy means knowing what's going on, but not doing anything about it. And when I realized about the fact that people are, there's psychological reasons why people are not acting on climate. One of them has to do with our communication. Saying that the climate crisis is happening in 100 years or 50 years, and it's happening in the North Pole or the South Pole, when it's already here and it's already happening to communities. Saying that there's another factor, which is finite pool of worry. If there's a farmer who's barely making ends meet, and I come and tell them, you need to change your whole production method and think about the environment, that's just insensitive. You cannot do that to someone. But when you tie the fact that, there's weather irregulation, climate irregulation that comes from the climate crisis, and that their crops are going to be even more affected, and that their stability and their children's stability is going to be more affected by the climate crisis, then you are more likely to get them on your side. And I think that that's what we have to do, have conversations about the real impacts of the climate crisis. And, that's how we are going to change from this culture of trying to deny everything and trying to take sides to a culture where we actually recognize that this is the biggest challenge that we've ever faced, and just tackle it with the skills that we do have in this country and around the world.
Well, I think it's when I look at young activists like yourselves, I think we're in a much better place than we probably deserve to be, given that we're leaving this big problem on your doorsteps. And there are folks who are part of our discussion today who have questions, and I'd like to bring them in. And we have a question from Nora Idris. And first, she wants to thank you both for everything you've done to prevent plastic pollution. She really appreciates it. She loves seeing other people involved in this issue. She and her friend started a business to reduce plastic waste. And they really are really delighted that other people are working on this topic. She wants to know, what has been the hardest part of your activism journey?
How much time do you have? And I think also I want to touch a little bit on the last question about like disbelievers and living in the suburbs of Georgia. Definitely have some people who don't believe in climate change. And honestly, like I try not bother my time with it. Like there's no point in arguing, I think, at such an individual level. If they're not going to believe it, I know that anything that I say isn't really going to change their own viewpoints. I can share my own perspective, share information, and they can share their own side of the story as well and kind of meet each other where we're at. But I know I cannot waste a ton of my energy into these few people when it's so much bigger than that. It's systemic change we have to focus on. And when I talk about policy and meet with people who also don't believe in climate change, you also want to kind of target your message towards your audience, kind of pivot on other issues that they might care about more. But again, you don't want to try and do that as much because you want to focus more on the people that do care in ways that we can find solutions instead of trying to change the disbelievers because they don't budge very much.
Right.
There aren't as many as I think we've also been led to believe. A lot of people just don't really just have the motivation to do much about it. Because again,
the apathy that she talked about. Yes.
There's so much apathy in thinking that it is such a far away issue. And same with ocean plastic. We think it's just plastic, impacting sea turtles far away from us. And again, I live hundreds of miles away from the nearest coastline, but plastic pollution is touching us almost every day of our lives. It's something we use plastics all the time, but also plastics is in our drinking water. It's in the seafood that we're eating. We eat around a credit card size worth of plastics every week from our current consumption of what we eat in a week. But there's also so many health impacts that are coming back from it. I can go on and on, talk about plastics. But going back to the original question, one of the hardest parts, I think, is oftentimes activists get a sense of burnout. And I know I definitely have. Sometimes this work can be very overwhelming, and these are very serious issues. And sometimes you just hit a point where you're like, am I doing enough? You kind of just hit this point. And I know I was kind of stuck for a couple of months about 2 years ago where I just did not have the same motivation to keep doing the work that I was doing. And I felt guilty that I wasn't able to do anything during that time, but I felt like even though I was doing stuff, there was no outcome from it, and that this work was way much bigger than myself. And to kind of get out of that, I've been so grateful to have such an incredible support system behind me. And again, having supportive parents and friends and family along the way. But also knowing that, this isn't an individual issue. This isn't our fault as an individual that climate change and plastic pollution is happening. It's so much bigger than that. These are systemic issues. And once you pull in more and more people involved, it's more of a collective solution when we all can put pressure on the main polluters, put pressure on CEOs and executives and on our own government officials to take action. That's where we'll really see change. It's not as much as, not using plastic straws. Of course, doing things in our daily lives will have an impact, but it's focusing more on the bigger solutions.
Xiye, what was one of the hardest things in your activism journey?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what Hannah said because I had a similar experience where maybe it's a little different, but there was a point where I thought I wasn't doing enough, to a point where I was just doing so much. I don't know if that makes sense, but I was just trying to do everything because it felt like any less wasn't enough. So I was, doing school, applying to college, I was on the administration committee of People's Climate Movement. I was organizing with Fridays for Future NYC. I was going to interviews left and right for both college and press. I was organizing. I was trying to keep doing gymnastics. And it was just so much. And there was a point where I got so stressed, I started getting heart palpitations.
Oh
And
no.
when I went to like one day I had to go to the hospital for it. And the doctor told me, there's nothing wrong with you, you're just too stressed. And that's when I realized that the climate movement is huge. And so not everything has to fall on one or two or three people. You know, we can distribute this work. And the more people that we get into the movement, the more we can distribute the work that we're doing. And so that's how I dealt with, you know, that was the hardest part of my activism, kind of letting go of the fact that I didn't need to be busy all the time, that I needed time to rest, that climate activism is about sustainable activism, about regenerative activism. And if
So it's
I
like
don't,
learning the lesson of sustainability for yourself.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, if I can't take care of myself, I can't take care of the world.
Exactly.
And that's something that my dad told me. You know, he was like, I know you want to do everything, and I did too. But there's times where we need to slow down and really take care of our communities and our own bodies and our own spirits.
Hannah, you mentioned policy. Is there one particular policy or policy? I think this was a question that came from Katie, who wanted to know if there's a number one policy change that needs to happen, that you know that you're focused on, that you're really agitating for.
Ooh, just one?
I mean, you know, not we know that there are many,
Yeah.
but is there something that is almost like this is a linchpin type of thing, you know, that many things have to go in, but is there something that's kind of a linchpin that we really need to push for this so that other things we can work on other things as well?
Of course. Bills that are currently introduced, I love the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, as I talked about a little bit earlier. Again, it's the first one nationally in the US talking about plastic pollution, and I think it covers almost every harmful aspect of plastic pollution, which I absolutely love. Also love the Green New Deal, and overall just like divesting away from fossil fuels and our reliance on it, and trying to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. I think those are kind of the main things. I know that's not one, I apologize. But again, like these issues are also very interconnected and intersect. So when you start developing on one of these issues or passing one of these legislations, it has a better impact on the rest of them as well.
Xiye, is there something that is kind of like the overarching piece that you feel about it?
Well, if there was one thing I could do, it would definitely be stop all fossil fuel extraction. You know, just stop the emissions of carbon, stop polluting communities. But when it comes to, as politically correctness calls for, you know, when it comes to attainable policy that we can actually introduce, something that I'm really passionate about is the Escazú Agreement, which is an agreement for all of Latin America to recognize different things. First of all, recognize that people have the right to learn about the climate crisis and learn about solutions. It's also a resolution that would grant protection to environmental defenders, as Latin America is one of the most dangerous countries to be an environmental defender. You know, it would also, you know, it just does a lot of amazing things. And I think that that type of policy needs to be implemented worldwide. But definitely in the United States, we need frameworks like the Green New Deal that actually get passed. And as we talked about before, that don't alienate people and don't leave anyone behind.
Great. And our last question is from Donna, who thanks you both so much for the conversation. And she wants to know, Hannah, how can we use your book as an entry into climate activism so that we can continue the conversation?
I love that question. Thank you so much for asking. And kind of referring back to something I said earlier, I think one of the best places to start is to educate yourself. And I think the book is definitely a great way to do that, is of course learning about the issue, and of course learn more online from other organizations as well. And then from there, kind of taking that first step into taking action. And that can be starting your own initiatives in your own community and kind of troubleshooting whatever issues you see in your own community. Like I know for me, at my own high school, I realized people would bring in reusable water bottles, but there was no places to refill them. So if they ran out, they would buy plastic water bottles at our school, and that would defeat the whole purpose of bringing their own bottles. And so now we have water refill stations built in our school so that we don't have to constantly be using plastic water bottles. So something like that, troubleshooting in your own community, finding what's lacking and being able to establish a campaign there, or something more general, whether it's petitions or more education focused, or even just joining other organizations on the campaigns that they're currently working on as well. There's so many great initiatives that are going on right now, and also for Earth Day as well. So even just looking online, finding so many other incredible organizations. I know Xiye also has a great organization, and I'll let you plug that as well, on whatever initiatives you're working on.
Awesome. Well, yeah, first of all, go get Hannah's book, 100%. And yeah, the organization that I co-founded last year because of the pandemic is called Rear's Initiative. And we focus on climate education, and we focus on making information accessible. Because as somebody who had to learn English, I know that climate information is massively inaccessible, even for a language that is as common as Spanish, because most of the information is either really complicated or really basic, and we need a combination of the two. We need to meet people where they're at. So that's something that Real Earth Initiative likes to focus on. And yeah, echoing what Hannah said, one of the best things we can do is educate ourselves and educate our circles.
I know I said one last question, but this is such a good one. I've just got to do this one last one. And it's from Kellen, who wants to know how we can include seniors and older people in climate action activism. And I think there is this sense that you guys are going to be the inheritors. And so we do focus on younger people. But I do think that there is something that could be learned from older people, from seniors. How do we do that? How do we cross generations as we do this work together?
Intergenerational conversations are so crucial, and I know oftentimes we stress young people, but that means all ages. And so having intergenerational conversations leads to more diversity in those areas, more diverse voices. And when you're talking about, policy or businesses, that's where you find more voices to have better change. So that I know when I'm, one of the youngest people in the room, sometimes for events, a lot of people turn to me and listen to my voice. And I know it's the same for older ages as well. They'll turn to you and look to you, especially as someone wiser, more informed. And sometimes for me, it's usually like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. So when you step into that room, you are someone that they look to and turn to. And so being able to, I know as Xiye also talked about earlier, is, when we were talking about adults, you want to support young people, but also just support these initiatives in general, because we also think that this is going to happen long time down the road, but it's happening right now. And so instead of ignoring that it's going to happen, way past your lifetime, when you're thinking about it now and how we have to make effective change now, whether it's policy or business, it's going to impact all of us. So we cannot wait.
Well, I said at the beginning that I couldn't think of a better way to spend Earth Day than to be with these two incredible young activists. And even I couldn't have foreseen just how powerful your words and your work would be this evening. So I just want to thank you so much for being with us today and for all of the hard work that you do. Take care of yourselves. I'm going to be a little mama hen right now. Take care of yourselves. We need you here for the long haul. So we appreciate you, but we want you to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because we really admire what you've done so far and want you to continue to do that. So Margaret, I'll turn things back over to you.
Yeah, no, I second what you're saying. Yeah. Thanks to you, Deb, for moderating, and Xiye and Hannah, thank you both so much for your time this evening and joining us and sharing your insights, your experience, your wisdom. It's really impressive. And also just another plug that we have put into the chat, the opportunity to purchase the book. And we do also have the book donation offer for the School Without Walls here in DC to help get students copies that are participating in their stewardship program. You can just simply, when you do the checkout process, you can simply put in book donation in the comments and not put down the store pickup. You don't have to ship it anywhere. We'll take care of that. If you would like to join us for other events, please follow us at Politics in Prose on our website. And you can also follow us on our social media is what I meant to say. And we have our Kids in Prose link that we'll put into the chat as well. So everyone, thank you again for the audience for the great questions, and the three of you for joining us this evening and sharing with us. And we hope that everyone stays safe, keep reading, and happy rest of Earth Day. Take care.